It starts small, so small you almost miss it. You're in a conversation and someone says something that misses the mark. They make an assumption about why you did something, or they describe you in a way that doesn't quite fit. A year ago, maybe 6 months ago, you would have stepped in. You would have offered a correction, a clarification, a bit of context to bring their perception closer to reality. But this time, you pause. The impulse is there, faint, familiar, and then it passes. You let the moment go. You don't correct them. You don't explain. You just continue the conversation, or you let it end, and you move on with your day. Afterward, you notice something. You don't feel the tension you expected. There's no residue of frustration, no lingering sense of being unseen. Just quiet. A strange, unfamiliar lightness. This happens again and again. A coworker misreads your tone in an email. A friend interprets your silence as agreement when it wasn't. A family member tells a story about you that leaves out the parts that mattered most. Each time, the old reflex surfaces, the urge to step in, to set the record straight. And each time, it fades a little faster. You start to wonder what's happening, whether something is wrong, whether you're becoming detached, checked out, less invested in being known. But that's not what it feels like. It feels like something is settling, like a part of you that was always reaching outward is finally coming to rest. The shift doesn't announce itself. There's no moment of decision, no conscious choice to stop explaining. It just starts happening. You notice it in hindsight, the way you notice that a season has changed only after the temperature has already shifted. One day you look back and realize you've been different for a while now. You just didn't have words for it yet. The people around you might not notice at first. You're still present, still engaged, still showing up. But something in the texture of your presence has changed. You're not offering as much. You're not filling silences with justification. You're not working as hard to make sure everyone understands you. And strangely, this doesn't feel like loss. It feels like relief. Explaining was never just about being understood. It was about something deeper, something you probably never named, even to yourself. When you explained, you were buying something. Safety, maybe. Belonging. The sense that if people saw you clearly, they would accept you. That if you could just articulate yourself well enough, you would be allowed to exist without friction. This transaction starts early. As children, we learn that words can close gaps. When someone is upset with us, we explain. When someone misunderstands, we clarify. We learn that explanation is the bridge between who we are inside and how we're perceived outside. And when the bridge works, when the explanation lands and the other person softens or nods or says, "I get it now," we feel a small rush of relief. We belong. We're seen. We're safe. The problem is that the bridge doesn't always work. Sometimes you explain and the other person doesn't soften. They stay where they were. Or they hear something different from what you said. Or they argue back, and suddenly you're not building a bridge at all. You're in a negotiation you didn't ask for. Over time, if you're paying attention, you start to notice a pattern. Certain people receive your explanations. They listen, they consider, they update their understanding. The bridge holds. With these people, explanation feels like connection. But other people don't receive anything. They listen, but nothing shifts. Or they don't really listen at all. They're waiting for you to finish so they can say what they were already going to say. With these people, explanation is a performance with no audience. You're speaking into a void, and the void swallows everything. This pattern, once you see it, becomes impossible to unsee. You start noticing, mid-conversation, whether your words are landing or disappearing. You start feeling the difference between someone who's receiving and someone who's simply present. And you start to feel something else too. The cost. Explaining takes energy, real energy, the kind that doesn't replenish quickly. Each time you step in to clarify, to defend, to make yourself understood, you're spending something. And when the explanation doesn't land, When the other person remains unmoved, you've spent that energy for nothing. You've depleted yourself and gained nothing in return. For a long time, you absorb this cost without questioning it. Explanation is just what you do. It's how connection works. It's the price of being known. But the cost accumulates, month after month, year after year. All those conversations where you offered yourself and nothing came back. All those times you worked to be seen and were met with indifference or resistance or misunderstanding. The exhaustion builds so slowly that you don't notice it building. You just wake up one day feeling heavier than you should. And somewhere in that heaviness, a question begins to form. A question you've never let yourself ask before. What if you stopped? The answer doesn't come all at once. It comes in pieces, through practice, through small experiments you don't even realize you're running. You're in a conversation and you sense something. A tightness in the other person, a tilt in their voice. Something that tells you, before you've even opened your mouth, that this conversation doesn't have room for what you are about to say. That if you explain yourself here, your words will meet resistance. That the gap between you will not close, no matter how carefully you try to bridge it. In the past, you would have tried anyway. You would have pushed through the tightness, offered your explanation, hoped for the best. But this time, you don't. You stay quiet. You let the moment pass. And you notice, afterward, that nothing bad happens. The relationship doesn't collapse. The other person doesn't spiral. Life continues. This starts happening more often. You develop a kind of sense for it, a filter. Before you speak, you're scanning, almost unconsciously, for whether the space can hold what you're about to offer. Whether there's room for honesty, whether the other person is in a state to receive. When the space is there, you speak. You offer yourself, and the offering lands. When the space isn't there, you don't. You let silence do what words cannot. This is not withdrawal. It's not disconnection. It's precision. You're not giving less. You're giving more carefully. You're placing your words only where they can actually do something. And everything you used to spend on explanations that went nowhere, you're keeping. The filter changes how you move through the world. Conversations become shorter, but cleaner. You say less, but what you say means more. You stop trying to force understanding into spaces that can't hold it. You stop pouring yourself into people who don't have the capacity to receive. And something unexpected happens. You start feeling more like yourself. The parts of you that were always being spent on fruitless explanation are now available for other things, for thinking, for resting, for being present with people who actually meet you. There's a sharpness to this new way of being, a clarity that feels almost unfamiliar. You've spent so much of your life explaining, justifying, making yourself understood, that silence feels strange at first, like you're forgetting something, like you're leaving a door open that should be closed. But the strangeness fades, and what's left is something solid, something that doesn't need to be defended, something that simply is. The changes show up in your relationships before you expect them to. Some connections start to feel different, lighter. The people who always received you, who listened and updated and met you halfway, they're still there. In fact, they feel closer now. With less noise in the way, what's real between you becomes easier to see. Conversations with these people become richer, more honest, more efficient. You don't have to work as hard to be understood, because understanding was already there. You were just too busy explaining to notice. Other connections start to thin. The people who required your constant explanation, who needed you to justify yourself, who never quite updated no matter how carefully you clarified, these relationships begin to reveal themselves. Without your effort holding them together, they drift. Some of them fade quietly. Others end in friction, in confusion, in the other person wondering what changed. What changed is that you stopped carrying the weight. You stopped doing the work of two people. And without that work, some relationships simply cannot stand. This is hard to witness. Even when you know, intellectually, that you're not doing anything wrong, it's still hard. Some of these people have been in your life for years. Some of them are family. Watching a connection thin, watching it lose substance because you stopped overfunctioning, brings a kind of grief that's difficult to name. You're not losing someone. You're seeing clearly what was always true. The relationship was never mutual. It was held together by your effort, and effort was all it ever was. Not everyone will understand this. Some people will see your silence as rejection, your distance as coldness. They'll tell you you've changed, and they won't mean it as a compliment. They'll interpret your new way of being as a judgment on them, as proof that you've given up, as evidence that you no longer care. You'll be tempted in these moments to explain, to offer context, to clarify, to make them see that this isn't abandonment. But the impulse fades faster now. You recognize it for what it is, the old pattern, reaching for control it never had. The desire to manage how others see you, and you let it go. You let them see what they see. You let them hold whatever version of you they're going to hold. It's not your job to correct it. It never was. You just didn't know that before. What remains after the thinning is something truer than what you had before. Fewer connections, maybe, but cleaner ones. Relationships that don't depend on your constant effort. People who see you without needing to be shown. Space that holds what you offer without requiring you to fight for it. You start to realize that you were never afraid of being misunderstood. You were afraid of what would happen if you let the misunderstanding stand. You thought the relationships would collapse. You thought people would leave. You thought you would end up alone. And some relationships did collapse. Some people did leave. But you didn't end up alone. You ended up with the ones who were real. There's a stage that comes after all of this. A stage that's hard to describe because it doesn't feel like arrival. It feels like settling. Like something that was always shifting has finally come to rest. You still speak. You're not silent as a rule. But you speak differently now. You speak when speaking serves something, when it builds, when it lands. You've lost the compulsion to fill every gap, correct every misperception, make yourself understood by everyone in the room. The old fear, the one that drove all that explaining, has gone quiet. It's not that you've become indifferent. You still care what people think. You still want to be seen. But the need has changed. It's softer now, less urgent. You can want to be understood without needing it to survive. This changes how you carry yourself. The vigilance fades, the constant scanning, the monitoring of how you're being received, the adjustment and readjustment, all of that eases. You stop performing for audiences that aren't watching. You stop managing perceptions that were never yours to control. What's left is something solid, a sense of self that doesn't depend on agreement, a stability that comes from inside rather than from how others respond. People might still misunderstand you. They might hold versions of you that don't match who you are. They might tell stories about you that leave out the parts that matter. And you'll notice, you'll feel the distance, but you won't chase it. You'll let them hold what they hold. You'll keep being who you are anyway. There's freedom in this, real freedom. The kind you didn't know you were missing because you'd never lived without the weight. You didn't realize how much energy you were spending until you stopped spending it. You didn't know how tired you were until you finally rested. Some people will see this and call it coldness. They'll say you've changed, that you've become harder to reach, that something warm in you has gone cool. And maybe they're right in a way. Something did change, but it wasn't warmth. It was desperation. The part of you that needed everyone to see you clearly, the part that worked so hard to close every gap, that part has finally stopped running. What's left isn't cold, it's clear. You know who you are. You know what's real. You know which relationships can hold weight and which ones were only ever held together by your effort. You know when to speak and when to stay quiet. You know what belongs to you and what belongs to other people's perceptions, and you've stopped confusing the two. This is the stage that doesn't reverse. You don't go back to over-explaining. You don't return to the exhausting work of making yourself understood by people who won't receive you. You've seen too clearly now. You've felt the difference between effort that lands and effort that disappears into nothing. You still show up. You still love. You still offer yourself to the people and spaces that can hold you. But you do it differently now, with less urgency, less performance, less need. You speak when it matters. You stay quiet when it doesn't. And in the space between, you rest in something you didn't know you were looking for. I didn't become cold. I became clear.